If you owned a TV in the late 90s to early 2000s and watched anything on MTV, Comedy Central, FX, or Spike TV, you most likely saw an ad, or several, for Girls Gone Wild. And while it's kind of an odd thing that a documentary would be coming out now about that infamous brand, Peacock is giving us an exclusive look at the man behind the franchise in Girls Gone Wild, the Untold story. So is it worth your time? Before the spread of social media and easy access to online porn, Joe Francis's multi-million-dollar Girls Gone Wild franchise had a shocking grip on popular culture, including Francis's first in-depth, in-person, on-the-record interview with a journalist in almost a decade, as well as exclusive access to his former employees, enemies, and survivors. Girls Gone Wild, the Untold story, offers an astonishing and wide-ranging account of a man whose impact on American culture cannot be overstated, whose alleged sins are numerous, and who now lives in exile on a sprawling estate in Mexico amidst the rubble of his once mighty empire. So journalist Sachi Cool sat down with GGW founder Joe Francis to do an interview. And while video wasn't permitted, she did capture over 8 hours of interview along with still photos that he allowed to be taken of him. Now probably a lot of this information isn't going to be new, or at least shocking. But my jaw was hanging open during some of this as all of the allegations, arrests, trials, and accounts of misdeeds came to light. And when I say misdeeds, that's really just toning down what was accused. I mean, we're talking coercion, not only of adult women, but also of underage girls, prostitution, sexual assault, and not just an instance or maybe two of any of these, but the reports were rampant, especially as the popularity grew and more people sought out the franchise. Now, it's going to be very easy to hear a lot of these women's stories and then dismiss them as having to live with just their poor decisions. In reality, though, even when consent was given, it was done when a woman was under the influence, or they felt trapped and forced. And then some, they weren't even of the age to be able to legally give consent. And it's also crazy to learn how the participants never got any compensation for their involvement. And if they ever complained or sued to have their likeness removed, it was an arduous process that was rarely successful. Now, outside of the raw interviews with the women who participated, we're also treated to several accounts from former employees of the company, in addition to legal counsels, other journalists, psychologists, and law enforcement. And these provide a ton of varied viewpoints on everything that went down. Some showing remorse or regret, others having outright fury and rage towards Joe Francis and his organization. But the most stomach-turning interview for me was with Francis himself. He comes across as a smarmy business guy, a savvy financial predator who was extremely smart and clever when it came to identifying media trends and then working to capitalize on them. Now, from a business standpoint, he was wildly successful, creating a booming business in a very short time, and in an era when the internet was barely a thing. But what was the massive turnoff for me is the large amount of hubris that he possesses, even today, choosing to dismiss any allegations and see himself as blameless, all while he sits in exile in Mexico on the run from U.S. law enforcement. And I'm kind of curious on that aspect because I really thought that the U.S. had an extradition treaty with Mexico. So it's unclear on why they just don't go down there and grab him, especially when it comes to light through on-screen title cards that Francis, he's had numerous complaints and run-ins with the Mexican legal system. I really wish the docuseries would have addressed this because it would have provided maybe just this small glimpse of justice for a fugitive. Now, the whole show, it's 3 almost hour-long episodes, and they go on a bit too long, especially because we see repeated footage and interviews throughout. Now, this would be fine if it were a weekly release and we needed a small refresher on what had happened previously, but all 3 episodes drop at once, so it's unnecessary to have such repetition that only works to drag out the storytelling. There are also elements that are belabored, again, creating unnecessary length. I mean, I don't want to minimize the screen time of those that were affected by the tapes or the recordings, but there are several sequences that continue to reiterate how a cameraman would have to coerce a woman into performing. And because we really only hear from one dude in particular with the cameraman, it's more effective for him to have just said, yeah, this was a common occurrence and an expectation as part of my job. So it happened at every shoot and every location. The documentary also does a good job of showing how ubiquitous the Girls Gone Wild brand was, and how Francis was able to lure high-profile celebrities into wearing the merch, or endorsing it through other implied means, like Brad Pitt, Kim Kardashian, Ashton Kutcher, Mario Lopez, Demi Moore, and others. I would have loved to have heard from those celebrities now. Given the times and the socio-zeitgeist, it's just completely different than it was in the early 2000s. mean, do these media figures regret their involvement or their endorsement? Do they even remember that they helped add to the clout and the allure of the brand? Now, while the documentary does do a good job of showcasing Frances, the brand's rise in popularity, and all the downfalls, there are areas that go completely ignored that would make for a decent additional episode. I think it's probably going to be fairly difficult to walk away from watching this and not feeling at least some contempt for Francis. Not because he built some massively successful money-making business, but because of how he took advantage of vulnerable people, many of whom were incapable of providing clear consent. And even more disgustingly, assaulting, allegedly, women in multiple cities and locations. Hearing the smugness from his own mouth, it's pretty damning. But it's the other accounts from those directly involved that solidified my opinion of the dude. Overall, I think Girls Gone Wild, The Untold Story, gives insight into a has-been sexual profiteer. While Francis was a pioneer in terms of unique marketing for his risque brand, the docuseries illuminates all the illegal and sketchy practices that went into making it a success. The series lacks some investigation into minor elements and doesn't work to offer much in the way of new information, but the exclusive recent interview access with Joe Francis does provide insight into the mind of the man that built a booming empire. Surprisingly, there's no sex or nudity, although there are a lot of descriptions of acts and behaviors. There's a bunch of profanity, and while only a little violence is shown, there are graphic descriptions of violence, including sexual assault. Now, as a reminder, I don't give couch ratings to documentaries, but Girls Gone Wild, The Untold Story, is just an okay one to check out. Because there's not a bunch that's new in the way of information or revelations. You're probably likely just going to know a lot about this anyway. So what are you binging right now? Anything great that you can recommend to me in the comments? If you enjoyed this review, please give it a like. Also, don't forget to share and subscribe. I'm Chris. This is Movies and Munchies. Thanks for couching with me.